Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
From sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be.
Hello, Kylene.
Oh, you started. Hello.
I did. We're going to get this show on the road here today.
Well, let's say welcome everyone to this week's episode of
Recover You.
Recover You.
Capital R, capital U.
Yes.
That's right.
How are you today, Patrick?
I'm doing good. I had a nice work trip this past week down to the Florida area, which is always nice. And work is going really well, and I feel good, and my ankle hurts less. So
I don't know if you told people you twisted it last time.
yeah, I stepped on a crab apple on my morning run.
You ran and fell on a crab apple.
I didn't fall on the crab apple. I stepped on the crab apple
while running.
And then, but no, it's healing well, and I can't wait to get back to running. But I'm taking a break right now. But I feel good. Yeah.
Good.
Yep.
Well, today we're going to be talking about modesty and pornography and how the messaging of both topics can twist sexuality and cause some of the same problems. It's a big one.
It is a big one.
So I posted this on Threads. I said, pornography creates a culture of dehumanization and viewing people as objects. Modesty culture creates a culture of dehumanization and viewing people as objects. Same outcome, different messaging.
Yeah.
I do not have a lot of things go viral. Some of that is on purpose. But I've not really had anything like really, really go viral on Threads before. So this is the first one. It's like really taken off. And a ton of people are liking it, a bunch of comments, a bunch of reposts. So then more people are seeing it, a bunch of shares. And so I thought, why don't we talk about this? Because it's been really on my mind. I saw some posts that sort of made me think about it, which is why I ended up making this post. I was seeing some other people talk about modesty culture and things like that. And this is one of those topics that has sort of like evolved in through my healing journey, I think. And so much, I was raised inside of purity culture. And then now, obviously, we learn about and discuss the toxicity of, porn addiction and the porn culture and all this kind of stuff. But what I've really sort of come to understand is how they really both cause very, very similar problems while coming at it from totally different perspectives. And I'll just share, I think maybe let's start with how that happens. But then I think what I'd like to share a little bit is why I think that happens and what the root of that is. So just thinking about the idea of pornography culture, well, just sex culture, right? Like our whole society, or just its view of sexuality and its acceptance of pornography and all of those sorts of things. At its core, the message is that women are to be sexualized. They are objects that are available to be sexualized. So breaking that down, woman equals potential object here for pleasure, should you choose to utilize that object in that way. And that's essentially the message that gets communicated. Now, from the side of pornography culture and sex culture in society, they go, that's fine. That's just the way it is, right? But the thing is, modesty culture and purity culture does the same thing while sort of saying and thinking and wanting to be different. It goes, women are sex objects. Women are, boys are designed to ogle them. Therefore, we have to prevent that. And so by all this preventing, they actually over-sexualize. So when you go, well, you have to cover up an ankle because an ankle's sexy. Well, then you're like literally brainwashing boys to go, ankles are sexy. Right? You're literally, well, and we've talked about this in I think the lusting and attraction episodes. I think more or less young men in Christian culture are brainwashed to believe that this is your brain. This is the only option. There is no other option. And you're sort of doomed. And women are the threat. So you see woman, you have stress response because you go, well, that's a sex object. That's something that's threatening to me. I don't, and let's say it's a Christian young man who wants to like do the, quote unquote right thing. And so he like sees a girl that he thinks is attractive. And instead of going, oh, like attractiveness is fine and I view her as a human and I'm going to get to know her and like all these kinds of things, he has literally his brain has been wired since childhood from all of the way that we communicate about things and the way that purity culture is taught to go, attractive woman equals stress for me. Because attractive woman equals stumbling block equals me doing something bad equals sex object. So it's really bad. Also, both cultures put a lot of stress on women because then it's just for existing, we are the problem.
Right. Yeah.
And we can't walk down the street and feel comfortable going, I'm not being sexualized. And one of the biggest arguments is, which is horrible. One of the first things that people will hear all the time if someone is sexually assaulted or hurt in some way or objectified or whatever, treated poorly, like in real life, is, well, what were you wearing? Like, did you do something that caused this to happen, right? And there is this exhibit that was made called What Were You Wearing? And I would encourage you to Google it. Just Google what were you wearing exhibit. And it literally is all the outfits of women that were sexually assaulted. And it goes the whole spectrum. Like you're covered up from your neck to your feet, like in normal clothing. Like, so my whole point with this is with what you were wearing and stuff is there is no line. So when modesty culture tries to claim that they know where the line is, and if you just, the idea with modesty culture is it's going to make me feel good because if I think that there is a line and I follow it, then nothing bad can happen. But what has been proven out is that is not true. That's not reality. There is no line, actually. You can't cover up your shoulders and be safe. You can't wear long pants and be safe. You can't wear a loose dress and be safe. You can't wear jeans and be safe. It's not about modesty. It's about the messaging of objectification and the literal brainwashing that tells people that women equal sex objects for pleasure. Right.
Yeah, and when you look at, we had talked about this on one of our earlier episodes about how I grew up in Miami and certainly was part of the evangelical church, but never heard any messages about purity culture and spaghetti straps and all those things because it lacked practicality in the Miami setting, right? Because it was hot and you had to go to the beach and all of these different things. And I never heard the spaghetti strap thing until I got here to Ohio. And I was kind of like, what is that all about? And you kind of told me that was a thing. Like, that's some of that purity culture, modesty culture sort of thing. But if you look at across a lot of different religions, their standard for modesty shifts, right? So it kind of goes back to what you're saying about the exhibit about what we were wearing or what I was wearing, and so like we're not going to single out any religions, but just think about in your own mind, picture how women are required to dress across the spectrum of religions, right, all the way across, and does it mean that in one and I don't know.
All the way to secular, right? Where there's not necessarily any sort of structure to it.
Right. Does it change the amount of pornography use? Does it change the amount of sexual assault? Does it change any of those things? And I would, without looking at the data, I would say it doesn't, because the only thing that really does change you is a heart change. And so it's when you can start to view people as human beings, and we don't talk about that. Like, how do you view someone as a human being and as the whole person? And, like you talk about the messages that people receive. So boys are receiving this message that like they, when they look at somebody, if their eyes happen to drift, well, they're a horrible person. And maybe, they're like, whatever.
Well, and then like the pornography message is that's okay.
Right.
The religious message is you're bad basically for, if you look at a girl, she's dangerous. Like that's the message you're getting there.
And then you have the flip side, and it's like as a young girl starts to turn into a woman, and she develops different things, the way we all change as human beings. But then she's told cover up, because so she learns to be ashamed of her body early,
and that sends the message to her again. You are a sex object,
an object,
and you have power over the decisions that other people make, which you don't. Yeah, you absolutely do not.
Right.
You have no influence on the other person and the decisions that they choose to make.
Yeah.
I think the thing that we miss in the whole conversation, and it solves so many problems, is always individual
responsibility.
Yeah, you always take responsibility. And that's not, someone goes, well, yeah, that's what we're trying to tell the girls to do, is to take responsibility. You are not responsible for other people.
Yeah.
You are responsible for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's where that argument breaks down, because you are putting the responsibility of boys' actions on the women.
Yeah.
That is not theirs to carry.
Right. I've thought about this. It's like I didn't raise a girl. I raised a boy. But like there's always like I was thinking about this. So I grew up in Miami in the 80s, right? And so there's always this notion of safety, right? It's not a good idea if you're a 16-year-old to be driving around downtown Miami in the 80s, which was the murder capital of the U.S., at 3 a.m. That's just a bad idea, right? Now you can get away with it, right? You can actually come home and stuff like that. So I think I always try to think through this when we've talked about purity culture before, in the book Every Man's Battle and all of these different things. I was like, how would I have communicated to a girl, to a daughter going through this process and having been through healing, and you know what I mean, and growing up in Miami where I didn't, my own personal arousal template had nothing to do with women, like physical women, and how
in real life,
how they dressed. And I think what I would have tried to do very, very delicately and firmly, and with as much love as I can, would have been to teach about the dangers of the world.
Exactly.
And say, hey, listen, this is when you're out with some friends and there's safety in numbers and, and things like that.
You teach them how to live in the world the way it exists without putting any of the responsibility for why bad things happen onto their shoulders.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think the other piece to that, though, is teaching self-worth and self-confidence, so that because a lot of times, and I just want to make this very clear when I say this, I'm not putting judgments on people who may have different standards of dress.
Right.
Maybe than me or you or, whatever. Everybody has, that's my point, is that everybody has a different standard. So when you're communicating to a young woman, what you want to do is make sure that she feels confident in the body that she was created in, and that she feels safe in that body and grounded in that body and safe with you, and that she is loved and seen and valued. And then from that place, then she's, developing healthy friendships, and you teach her about the world and how to navigate in groups and like the reality that there is danger in the world. But that danger is not her fault if she chooses to go out with friends for homecoming and wears a dress that doesn't have, it's like a sleeveless dress, for example, that, so it is, I agree with you. We don't want to ignore the fact that bad things happen, but that's not the point. I think we always have to go back to, how do we teach the next generation how to treat each other, and how do we shift the messaging to stop blaming the victims? That's the key, is like we have to, all of the messaging is about the victim being the problem.
Yeah. Well, and you said something, it was in your talking to Keegan on this stuff, and I hope my memory is correct on this, but it was essentially like, as a man, we want to be so safe that if, let's say, we see a naked woman walking down the road, our first concern is for her, like, hey, what what's wrong? Is there something
Yeah,
going wrong?
you should approach it with compassion and curiosity.
And if there's a way to get her to safety or something like that, you work in that end.
Your thought should go, what is happening?
Right.
Is she okay?
Yeah.
What has happened in her life right now that this is going on?
Mm-hmm.
Not, ooh, there's a sex object and that's for me and I'm in danger. Like she's not threatening you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like she's only a threat if you make her a threat.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There's a couple comments that I sort of wanted to address that I was getting. So one, and I totally get where this is coming from, but I prefer long form content like podcasts because we can kind of talk it out. It's hard when you're on social media trying to do like little paragraph replies and stuff like that. So this person replied, maybe. So this is in response to the thread where I said, basically pornography creates a culture of dehumanization and so does modesty. Maybe, but modesty doesn't create a wrong idea of sex and relationships for young teens like porn does. It doesn't force them down the rabbit holes of lust in order to satisfy an ever-growing need for more stimulation. It doesn't make 10-year-olds think about sex when they should be thinking about holding hands. Porn is one of our most damaging creations, and we have plenty of evidence to support that. Now, I did reply, but I wanted to bring this comment into the podcast because I think it's a really good example of how a lot of people think that want to defend purity culture and want to defend modesty arguments. And so I thought maybe we could just sort of talk about it and break it down. So he starts with, modesty doesn't create a wrong idea of sex and relationships for young teens like porn does. And I would completely disagree. It absolutely does for the reasons I was talking about earlier. It teaches boys at a very young age, an inappropriate age, that like sex should not be on their minds. Interacting with girls, when you're 0 to like 12, you should be able to have girl friendships and not be thinking, oh, like their shorts are too short, right? Or,
right.
We're going to the pool. Oh, like my friend Susie, we're 8 years old and she's wearing a bikini. Like that is something that like kids interacting should not be thinking about, right? Like that is just, I'm a kid, you're a kid, we're best friends. You know what I mean? So when we, at such young ages, and then as soon as they get into, they go to church camp or they get into youth group or whatever it is. And then we start having these modesty messages and it's seemingly so innocent. Save yourself for marriage. But a lot of those messages ended up giving the opposite positive or the negative message that basically is like, if you don't, you're horrible and you're broken. Right. They would literally say like, you're broken, you're worthless. Like you are worth less because you've made a decision like this. If if you choose to do that. So a lot of the messaging is coming from a place of fear, control, and shaming. And that's what I want. When I said earlier, I want to get into like why I think these both fall flat is because anytime we have messages that come from fear and control, it's not going to end up in a healthy way. So I think the answer to the problem that we're sort of going, hey, evil does exist in the world, right? Is like at the root of it, what do we actually want to teach people is to love God, love self, love others. When you love God and then you are influenced by his love and you have love for yourself and that value and that worth and that intrinsic love for self, and then you pass on the same level of love and respect for other humans and you love them, then it solves almost all of these problems. So if you can't love yourself, you can't love and respect someone else. So a lot of times when people are objectifying and dehumanizing or being cruel or being angry or hurting other people in some way, a lot of times that is a reflection of a lot of the inner turmoil that they have inside of themselves. And so someone raised in church culture might go, oh my gosh, that sounds so selfish that you put self in there in the middle because the first two commandments are to love the Lord your God and to love others, right? But you have to love yourself. That's part of your relationship with God, that you are made in his image and that you recognize that you are valuable. And it's when the commandment is that you love others the way you love yourself. So it's actually really, really, really important that you get to the place where you have that value for yourself and then translate that to how you treat other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the second part was, it doesn't force them down rabbit holes of lust to satisfy an ever-growing need for more stimulation. I disagree. I see this all the time in Christian men who are addicted to pornography, how because of their quote-unquote modesty boundaries, they find things that are kind of normal in society as now sexually stimulating. And we talked about this maybe a month ago on the podcast when we were talking about lust versus attraction and things of that nature. One of the most common things you see is yoga pants being a problem for people that were raised in modesty culture because they were programmed to believe that tight equals sexual. Or seeing the shape of someone's body equals sexual.
Well, one of the things that as we move through the healing path and as I run groups, one of the midway points is we work really hard to identify what our arousal template is. And the arousal template is super, super important. And oddly enough, the first part of identifying what the arousal template is kind of what's going on in your life. What stressors are there? What was happening in your life? Interaction with your boss, whatever. And what's interesting is everyone has a different arousal template. So that's the fallacy of purity culture, is because they assign 6 things. And I think that's what you're saying about like yoga pants. But everybody, as I talk to people and people really start to get vulnerable and pull this forward and talk about, well, it was this thing and it was that thing. And so like I've talked about myself, it's pain and being in a private setting, right? That was my quote unquote arousal template, because that's what kind of sent me off on had nothing to do with purity culture.
Yeah, and the pain is specific to everybody. Sometimes it's their arousal template has to do with like neglect from a parent, or maybe it has something to do with like they didn't have a good family life, but they were very connected to their grandma, or they were rejected by their father, or they had an abusive parent. Like there's a lot of like different things that go into, when you said pain, there's like 20, like more than 20, there's like a million different infinity categories because of the individuals. And then that translates into, okay, how does my sexuality show up in unhealthy ways then?
Right. So I think my point is when I view the purity culture message, it's a lazy view of what the nature of pain and how it ties to destructive behavior. It's a lazy connection, because if somebody is acting out because of somebody in yoga pants, it has nothing to do, and it's the point you're making. It's nothing to do with yoga pants. It has everything to do with what has happened to that person and how they're medicating the pain. And yoga pants might be a destination that they get to, but another person, it could be khaki pants. It could be running shoes. I mean, it's
that's
just
the thing. But modesty culture also says it's the things you don't see. Yeah. It teaches people it's what's underneath that flowy dress. And you have to wear that flowy dress, because if you see like you're doomed, right?
Well, that's the whole, like, don't think about the elephant. Don't think about the elephant in the room.
Point.
The elephant in the room. The elephant's in the room. Don't stop thinking about it. You're like, and when you become an addict, you can't stop thinking about it. But I think
the same answer goes for boys that it does for girls. If we want to build self-confidence and self-worth in girls, we must also do that for the boys, because the problems that you see when you have an adult that is addicted to pornography is that they did not have this emotionally secure home where they had problems and they were taught how to resolve them in safe, healthy ways. And so it's always going, like, if we want to resolve this as an issue, what do? We start with the people that are in the midst of the problem, right? So this whole podcast is dedicated to recovering sex addicts and people that are struggling with the outcome of that and the betrayal trauma, right? So we start with that. Let's get stable. Let's get our own minds healthy. Let's get our own lives in order and get to that place of health and alignment and authenticity and love and peace and security, where you feel safe in your body and you know that you're not a threat to anybody and nobody's a threat to you, because there's like, I'm in control, like I'm good. Right. So that's one. But okay, so then how do we keep that going? If you want a ripple effect in the world, next step is the next generation. So what do we do there? We have to think about how we talk to children and how we bring them up. And what is the answer? And how do we teach them to do that? I think it's always going to go back to loving God, loving self, loving others. And it has to come from a place of love, because the alternative to love is fear and control. And anytime, and that's the thing with modesty and purity culture, the reason it got so popular and the reason it feels so confusing to people is because it is wrapped in this message of love and care that is false. at the root of it, underneath it, the energy that underlies the message is fear and control. And so when you get that one layer deep underneath the wrapping paper, it's destructive. It's not healthy. It's not helpful. It harms people and it hurts people and it keeps people stuck and it actually contributes to the problem. Now, not everybody that's raised in modesty culture is going to grow up and be a porn addict. Yeah. And not everybody that is raised in purity culture as a woman is going to be insecure about her body. But what we do see is that more overwhelmingly than not, the outcome of these messages have hurt people in adulthood and not helped them. The whole goal, the wrapping in love, is we want you to have healthy sexuality, but you don't actually teach people to do that. Right. It's like the whole don't have sex until marriage. You're a horrible person if you do. You're valueless if you do, or you've lost value if you do. But then we're not going to teach you like how to actually engage in healthy ways. We're not going to teach you how beautiful sex is. We're not going to teach you how to connect emotionally with your partner. We're not going to teach you like how to actually create something good. We're just going to tell you it's bad, stress you out so much that you get married, you've never had sex, and then you have sex and it's horrible.
I was thinking as you're telling this story, like, shame is what keeps us in addiction and all of these different things. And I remember my mom said this to me, and she was such a loving mother and she really wanted what was best for us and everything. But the whole, you should be ashamed of yourself. You know what I mean? And so like that was like a way of parenting. And I'm sure there are people who have said it and probably feel bad about saying it or haven't thought about it when they say it to their kids. But it's like, imagine telling your kid to be ashamed.
Yeah.
Hey, be ashamed. And so, because that's going to lead to a healthy outcome, as opposed to saying, to your point, like a healthy way. And I think that's where a lot of this came from, was that heavy parenting, heavy control, which, you do have to, you are raising, little kids are kind of like wild animals and you have to like shape them, but it's like there's healthier ways to do it and still get the same outcome without crushing someone's spirit in a way.
Well, and how do you do that? You don't go from a place of fear and control.
Right.
You go from a place of teaching that you love yourself and you love others. Now, how do you do that in practice?
Right.
How do you treat other people? How do you treat yourself when you're sad, when you're scared, when you're frustrated, when you don't get something you want? How do we deal with that? If you see someone else that is sad or scared or frustrated, how do you treat that person? How do you learn how to connect on an emotional level with somebody that is different than you? How do you learn how to not be triggered when somebody has a different opinion? How do you learn how to listen to both sides of this argument, really, like pornography, sexuality is great, and not to stress out too much about that, but then like say, okay, well, how do we shift this message going forward, right? So I think that's the question for me. And listen, to the same point, everybody listening can feel free to disagree. But in my life, I constantly come back to this idea over and over and over again, that if my motives are not rooted in a place that feels calm, peaceful, and comes from a place of love, then it's probably not right.
Yeah.
It's probably not healthy.
Right.
And the only way that I've gotten to that is by doing so much healing that I've finally gotten to a place where I go, oh, that's what that feels like, to be that grounded and that rooted and that calm and that safe. And that person can think that, and okay, like I don't love that they think that way. Like I don't love posting this and it going viral. You get like 1,000 hearts, but then you get like these troll comments, right? Or these people that disagree. I don't love that. Yeah. But I also know this is a very high conflict statement that I made, right? One thing that I don't really understand is how people are getting the idea that I think porn is okay. Like the whole point of the post is that both things are bad. But anyway, so the comment kind of wraps up with, it doesn't make 10-year-olds think, talking about modesty, it doesn't make 10-year-olds think about sex when they should be thinking about holding hands. I would disagree with that. That's one of my frustrations with it, is it does. Because when you're 10 years old and you want to go to summer camp and you're told that you can't wear spaghetti straps that you wear every single day at home in the hot summer, and you're specifically told because there's boys there, what message does that send other than your body is a sex object? Right. Yeah. Your body presents danger to you are dangerous. Yeah, you are a threat. Right. You're dangerous. Your body is inherently bad. That's what it tells a girl. The way you are made is inherently bad because it hurts other people. That's the message that people absorb from that. And it's terrible. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's also like if you're, to flip it around, and I know we're kind of repeating in a way, but it's like,
you're the 10-year-old boy that's so excited. You love camp because you get to go jump in the water and you read the packing list, right? And you see that part about spaghetti straps on a girl and you're like, wait, what's wrong with my neighbor is a girl and we go swimming all the time and it's not
I've
really
never thought about her that way.
I've never thought about, well, now should I think about her that way?
Now that thought has entered my mind.
Yeah.
You know, I'm really passionate about this for a couple reasons. One, I had that sexual abuse when I was very young. I know what it feels like to have a cloud of sexuality, dark sexuality, over childhood that should not be there. It is horrible. Mm-hmm. It absolutely covers every experience as you age, and it introduces things into your life that should not be introduced. It caused my brain so much stress and trauma as I was growing up, gathered more information, and tried to figure out and began to understand the reality of what had happened. Mm-hmm. It caused so much shame in my life and so much embarrassment and all of these different things. And that shouldn't have happened.
Right.
I shouldn't have been exposed to sexual things at such an early age. That shouldn't have happened, but it did. And so then I also, on top of that, was raised in the purity culture and stuff. So my family did not talk about sex. This was not something, and that's the thing I think I want to communicate too, is we can never stop bad things from happening. Someone listening to the podcast has a child who has been hurt like that. Mm-hmm. And so it's not that we can't stop it, but what do we do about it? So if I think about that specific situation, had my parents been equipped to come around me and talk and check in when it finally all came out, we never talked about it again after that. And I don't blame them for that. I think they thought, well, if we bring it up, it'll make her think about it, and they didn't want to do that. But I think what they didn't realize is I'd been thinking about it for years. And it caused extreme amounts of stress in my life, which is why it ultimately ended up coming out the way it did. But if they had been able to go, hey, are you okay? I know that conversation yesterday was really hard. And then the next week, hey, just checking in. How are you feeling about everything? And then over time, as I aged, this is what healthy sex looks like. This is what healthy sexuality is. This is what, this means to connect to another person in a healthy way. Having those and de-stressing the idea of sex over time, de-stressing the idea of sexuality over time and connection with other people over time. That is what I think can even when bad, horrible things happen in the world, mm-hmm. we can still create secure attachment with our children or with people or friends that we're in communication with, that creates safety again in their body because they feel seen. And that's mm-hmm. That is what is so crucial, is that someone feels seen. And that's the opposite of these messages. They're not being seen as a human. They are being objectified. And even in these messages where we're trying to push something that's healthy, the end message is objectification and that there's no way out of that. But I would argue the way out of that is that we practice seeing people mm-hmm. and we practice connecting with people and we teach people, I see you for who you are. You're safe and you can be safe with me and you can be safe in your body. Now, to your point, we have to be aware that how do we interact with the world?
Right.
But I think that's where I would start.
Oh, what's interesting is you were talking about living with that secret and that heaviness. To
be clear, I didn't want to keep it a secret. I was just so young that I didn't have the words.
Say, yeah.
I tried to talk to them multiple times. Mm-hmm. I just couldn't communicate it.
I also remember that resonated with me, that heaviness, that sexual heaviness. I grew up in a household where my father was very open and inappropriate. You could argue.
He was the porn is okay message.
Yeah, and my mom was not. So there was a tension there in the house. It was never really resolved. And when I got exposed at a young age, I didn't really know what to do with that. Mm-hmm. And so I do remember kind of feeling this, as a boy, I remember it's something would come on TV because back then, you watched TV in the living room, right? That's all you did, right? With your parents, and something would come along that was probably a little inappropriate, and I would get aroused as a kid, and I'd be very embarrassed by it. Mm-hmm. So there was that heaviness, right, that was going on there, and so, but nobody was ever I didn't feel comfortable to go, I'm not comfortable with this. Can I go? I wouldn't leave. It was a really weird. So it was there was this heaviness that that came around, like I was ashamed of it, but I didn't know how to resolve it. I was just hoping the situation would end. You know what I mean? And stuff like that. And like it's just a really, really interesting. So like, you grew up in one particular situation. I grew up in another. And I guess the point I'm making is the parallels that I'm hearing, certainly what happened to you was much, much different than what happened to me. And you were the victim and all these, but that sense that
you were a victim.
Well, that's
you got exposed to stuff too early. I think that's the same thing.
Right. But you talk about the heaviness.
You get exposed to something that's not what you should be exposed to.
Right.
I think it's,
I didn't know how to handle it, and there was nobody to go to, and I couldn't talk about it other than just like, well, maybe I'm just a guy and that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, well, and that's my point when it comes to how do we handle that situation. We have to curate those conversations with our kids.
Yeah.
So that, like in that situation, you would have felt safe going, hey, Mom, I feel really uncomfortable. Mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. And for me, like I've talked about the book Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, and also the book God Made All of You. Something like that. But one of those books my therapist had me read in a session years ago, and I started crying because the book gives the child the words to communicate to their parents. And I was like, oh, if I had only had the words. Yeah. That was the problem. I didn't have the words. Right? So we can use these resources. We can take the experiences that we've had in life and we can translate them to the next generation of how do I give my kids the words? How do I make sure that this is safe, that sex is not a topic, that nothing is off topic. If my child feels uncomfortable, they can come to me and begin to practice that, and we've talked about Keegan and we've tried to curate those conversations. We tried to curate those conversations before discovery, but we tried way harder after discovery. And we just kept learning and try to keep that an open dialogue, but it's all going to come back to helping someone feel seen in their experience so that they don't have to feel shame around it, because the shame and the fear is ultimately, again, if it's rooted in fear, it's going to end up in an unhealthy place.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting is, I talked about those situations of being with my parents. Something inappropriate is on TV. You're aroused, but you feel really bad about it and you're ashamed. And one of the most healing things that I went through in the therapy chair was where my therapist allowed me to think through how I rescued myself. So at that point,
you got to go back and reparent yourself in that moment.
I reparented myself in that moment, and that was huge because now I was able to understand what and my parents love me. I would never question that. But what a loving, healed person would do for a young child in that situation. And I was able to pull myself out of that situation and tend to my young self at that point. And it really did a lot to start to bring down the shame of that situation, because it was also like, it's not really your fault. You're just a little kid. You don't, nobody gives you a questionnaire at the beginning and says, would you like to, with no repercussions, do A, B, or C? And you probably would have picked the right one. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah. Okay, there's another comment. This was on TikTok because at the similar times that I posted that little comment on Threads, I also posted a video about modesty culture on TikTok. And so this was a comment that I got on TikTok. And again, I think it's really good because it's coming from this place that, no, like modesty is good. Like this is a good thing, right? And I'm not saying that some variation of modesty isn't. I think my argument would be we've got to leave it up to individual choice based on the conviction of the Holy Spirit for each individual. So that's your relationship with God and your spirituality determining, and again, that healing, that wholeness, that coming from a place of love and grounding, where is your personal decision? But this is where I think that stops, deleting the mind reading of other people. So it's not based on, so that's why I want to read this comment. I was not raised in the church, but became a Christian later. I developed my own beliefs about modesty after talking with very sincere, honest guys at my college about how hard it was to focus at schools when girls were dressed immodestly. And with lust too, of course. They weren't blaming women at all, but it can be a real struggle for good men. It's like the verse about not eating meat if it offends your brother. Their lust is still their sin, always. But if I can respect myself and make it easier for them by dressing more modestly, that seems like a good thing. So my thing there is that she's still coming back to, I had to make a life decision because of a conversation I had with someone that can't control their own thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that takes all of the responsibility off of the people that objectify. Let's retrain those brains. And I don't know how she dresses. So
Yeah.
I have no opinion on it. Like, she's made that decision. That's her decision. She feels good about it. That's fine. But the fact that it was influenced by Christian men saying, I struggle with lust if other people live their lives, I don't like that. I don't like that that is the deciding factor. Because I also think one of the things that happens in this messaging is like it deletes the message of the gospel, which is that freedom is possible.
Right, right. Well, it goes back to what we talked about. You know, like if you find yourself, if something comes up in front of you and it kind of takes you by surprise and activates you a little bit, and maybe there's that lusting that pops in, like, what's going on? That's when you have to go back and go, am I having a rough week? Is there a wound that you know what I mean? Like, you go back into
why would you choose to, why would your brain go to objectification?
And I've heard guys do this early on. They say this all the time. It just, I was going through my week and boom, I relapsed. Like, no, you didn't. It just did not happen that way. There's things that you haven't addressed. And so it may seem like that because you're used to living in a state of anxiety and exhaustion and ticked off and stuff like that. So, of course, the relapse is that much closer. But you're not actually living in full recovery. And full recovery is increasing in relationships with God and others.
Yeah.
That's actually one of the great definitions of recovery.
And no shade to the guys that had those conversations with her, because they were probably just telling her their experience. But again, I know this sounds harsh, but I firmly believe this at this point. And it's not intentional, and I'm going to be very clear about that I'm not like placing this on the people pushing this message. Well, maybe a little bit. It depends on who they are, but and how aware they are, or who's talked to them about it being a problem. Because sometimes that happens. They bring up and say, "Hey, Modesty, what your message is hurting people," and then they're like, "I don't care. I'm doing it anyway." But most of the time, a lot of the time, in church culture and modesty culture, it's just we think that this is good and we're teaching this to people. Yeah. And so, but my point is with the guys, they were sharing that with this woman. They transferred their lack of self-control and their lack of healing into guilt for her, or quote unquote conviction for her, so that she changed her life instead of them doing the healing work. And I am totally convinced at this point that those guys were essentially brainwashed.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Because if you're not, like, then you're open to the idea that there's another option out there, but when you are hardwired from being a child, you go, I can't question this. This is just how I am.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a great.
I'm sorry if brainwash sounds like a harsh term.
That's okay.
I'm not saying that I think that people are doing it on purpose. Like your pastor is going, I'm going to brainwash my congregation. But that's ultimately what it is when it starts like super young and you push an agenda and then people aren't allowed to question it. And that's what I think accidentally, in most, maybe not all, but most ways, modesty culture started as like a good intention, but ended up really badly hurting people.
There's a great line in Conquer from Ted Robertson. I'm going to paraphrase it, but basically he talks about how women just don't understand when you relapse. Like, to them, it's a deep emotional wound, and you can say, well, but I love you. And she's like, well, I don't understand how you would say that. And then he says something along the lines of, and then he'll say something like, well, she didn't make herself available for me, or women were dressing too provocatively, or something like he makes that. And so, like, here's a guy who was a sex addict, who has become a pastor, and he recognizes, and he was a CSAT, and he's done all these things, and he's worked with thousands and thousands of guys and created all these programs. He's like, it's all garbage. It's all garbage. It's all about your own, personal wounding.
He's saying that's the excuse people make, right, and he's throwing that out the window.
It's a standard one, right? It's a standard one, yeah.
Yeah, so I feel for the woman who made the comment, I don't know what her quote unquote level of modesty ended up being because of that. I just know through my lived experience what it has felt like to be in places where I go, I think I have the possibility of being objectified, and then feeling uncomfortable in my body, and then changing what I was wearing because of that. And then, but like specifically after discovery, my brain was so traumatized and so hypervigilant, and I was like, all men objectify, and I'm being objectified. I couldn't even go to church and feel comfortable, looking nice or feeling attractive. I felt so like, even like, Sunday morning, I was like, oh, this is horrible. And then moving through it and getting to a place where it's like, maybe they are, maybe they aren't, not my responsibility. And I think it always goes, the woman's responsibility is to, again, I'm going to go back to it. Love God, love self, love others. And it's got to come from real love. And how do you know it's real love and not fear? It's rooted in this place of safety and feeling grounded and aligned. It's not this triggered, anxious, fear-based, external decision-making place. And for the guys, taking personal responsibility. There could be a woman sitting right next to you wearing something that you don't like. That is not her problem.
That's right.
That is a you problem.
That's right.
And you have to start with, okay, what is in it? Just like any trigger, and that's what I would call that, a trigger. So-and-so sitting next to me and I got triggered, I got a little activated in some way. My brain goes, bloop, that's attractive, uh-oh. And we talked about this. I would go back if you didn't listen to the lust versus attraction episode, because we talked about this specifically, like your brain doesn't have to go that way, and what does that look like, and what does that mean? But if you get triggered by someone like sitting next to you, instead of going, that person needs to change their life, that person needs to that is a you problem. That is something where you go, okay, I got triggered. What is underneath that trigger? Why did I feel that way? There's something to be healed within me. There's something to be faced, a fear, an insecurity, whatever it is. Yeah. And you deserve that healing. Just like she deserves the healing to not be worried about sitting next to someone being triggered by her. And so I think that's where I always kind of come back to like this whole idea that pornography has the end result where it says humans are objects, and that's okay. There's no problem with that. And, obviously we disagree with that, but that's what pornography says. Humans are objects, and that's okay. Unfortunately, extremely unfortunately, modesty culture goes, humans are objects.
Yeah.
And so instead of resolving the issue that we think that humans are objects, which is what we should be doing, we go, humans are objects, therefore we have to put all these safety guards in place.
Yeah.
We have to do this and that, put up the wall, build the hedge, dart your eyes, wear long sleeve shirts.
Yeah. What's interesting as you're talking about this, it's like I think is when you get into this community and there's so much hurt, and the hurt has been based upon inappropriate use of compulsive sexual behavior and whatever, and so it's natural to look at that and say, hey, how do we heal from that? And we don't want to shame addicts who are really, really trying and all this stuff, and so what we also don't want to shame people who have grown up in purity culture and have I guess to use your term, been brainwashed by it or whatever.
Sorry. Listen, I was raised, I get it, okay?
Yeah, you were raised in it.
I was also partially raised in a cult for a period of time. And so, no shade to anyone listening that had similar experiences.
Yeah, I think it's always like, it's always like, I always think about how do we boil down messages and how do we make things simple for folks to look at. And I think you're hitting the nail on the head is whenever we don't view somebody as a whole person and there is either consumption based or fear of consumption, and we're just not viewing people for who they are. Right. And so I think that this is not about shame or whatever. It's just questioning, hey, what's your motivation? How are you viewing that person? And can you view that person with love? Can you view that person with and as men, and this is, I hope this doesn't come across weird, but I strongly believe that as a man, we have the opportunity to be protectors in a lot of ways, because we that's how I kind of view. I would like to not control anybody, but protect them. Like if I can move through life being safe, you and I have joked about this because like I travel and I've been down down in the Disney area, and it's just a fun place to be and stuff like that. There's a lot of families and stuff. And because I've been on business, I'll go to dinner by myself, like at one of these Disney World restaurants or whatever. I'm like, I hope nobody thinks I'm just unsafe, like a dude just walking around by himself.
Random adult man.
Yeah, but it's
in
like
Disney World by himself.
But because of that, I make sure that my behaviors aren't, you know what I mean? Like I'm, you know what I mean? Because there's a lot of little kids and, you know, and things like that. So it's just kind of funny. Like my behaviors are fine, but I don't know, for some reason, I think I had read a post somewhere where somebody criticized like adults going to Disney World
By themselves.
Yeah. So I think I'm a little sensitive to it. You know what I mean? But like, my whole point is, now that I've been able to get to a point where my mind is healed, I want to be safe. I don't want anybody to ever view me as unsafe.
Yeah, that's the point that's the issue
like
that I have with modesty culture, though, is that exact thing. Is that with the men that push it in churches and in church culture, go, this is just the way that it is. And instead of working on being safe adult males, we're going to put the problem on women. Yeah, women are always the one that has to solve it in purity culture. It's always the woman. And some of the messaging, and for anyone that's not familiar with this, you can go follow Sheila Gregor, read her books, follow her on social media, because she does the research and she reads the books. And these are actual teachings that people will say and put out there in books, and again, wrap up under the guise of love that is totally fake. It's about control, but I'm going to control women because I can't control myself. That is the problem.
Yeah.
As opposed to saying, I'm going to be a safe person, and there's nothing in the world that can shake that.
I'm actually glad you said safe adult male, because I was struggling to come up with that term, and that's exactly what I want to be. And I think I've been able to achieve that now. And so you're
like the safest.
Well, I want to live into that. I want people to sense that.
Oh, they totally do.
You know what I mean?
Animals, kids, human beings, they are so like, you're like a magnet, because they're like, Uncle Patrick.
By the way, none of the kids in Disney World call me Uncle Patrick, but
no, like, literally our nieces and nephews. Literally our nieces and nephews.
Yeah. So, but it's interesting because, like, I think it's led me on this like, after Discovery, or before Discovery, actually, really, but then certainly after Discovery, I realized, man, I was not safe. I was not a safe person, and I needed to in my work to get safe again. I would continue to ask myself, am I being safe? Mm-hmm. Am I being safe? What is my behavior like? Am I ignoring people because I'm afraid? And I think this goes through the purity culture. Am I ignoring people because I'm afraid I'm going to objectify them? Or am I operating in a manner that's just normal and recognizes them for the human beings that they are? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Those
well, and
kinds
I think
of
this
things.
whole message too can also be, and I don't know, this may trigger some people, but I think this also shapes how women view other women. Mm-hmm. We also should not see other women like as threats. If you see someone as a threat because your husband is right next to you, that is your husband's issue.
That's right.
That is not the woman's issue. If you are afraid that he's going to do something because that's rooted in patterns that he has exhibited in the past, that is his lack of healing issue. That is not the woman at the pool issue. Mm-hmm. And, this shapes how, this is probably a whole other episode.
I think if I could real quick, and just for those of you who are going through the betrayal recovery thing, you may, as a woman or the betrayed partner, you may feel that fear, and your husband may be doing really good. And it's okay. You're still working through some things. Like, I think it's...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not
I just want to make sure I said that.
I'm glad to bring that in. Yeah. I'm glad you did, because... no, that's a normal response. Let's say you're like a year. That's a normal response forever. Like there still might be insecurities and stuff like that. But my point is that we're not projecting the responsibility of that on someone that its shoulders doesn't lay. It's very normal for you to feel triggered after betrayal. It's very normal to have those conversations, to have certain boundaries. And that would be maybe a boundary that helps you feel more safe. And it's less about, maybe your husband is like, because you and I have talked about this, like, you're good, you're not objectifying someone, you're not going to go act out, but maybe because that has happened in the past, your addiction happened, that I just feel safer, like, if we don't go to like a beach or something. Like, that's fine. That's totally fine. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that, yeah, when we're in that situation, I go, that's because of your behavior. That's not because so-and-so shouldn't be wearing a bikini.
Right.
That's my point. So, and that's what I mean is like, this is like an entirely different episode, but like, you know, when I was married and my ex, you know, had whatever, an affair, whatever, emotional affair, whatever it was with his assistant, I'm not going to, like, that's not, yes, she needs to take responsibility for her part in that, but I have a relationship with him. That is a him issue in our relationship.
Right.
Same thing when you had the addiction. I disagree with the pornography world, but I am not blaming the sex workers for your behavior.
Right.
That is a you problem.
Absolutely.
So that's my point with this whole modesty culture thing. We can still hold the stance that I don't think the world of pornography and sex work should be in existence. But what do we do about that? We go down to the root cause of how do humans interact with other humans. And if the reason it exists is because as a society, we've decided that objectifying people is okay. And so it's got to be a grassroots movement, which is, you know, what we should do, which is we have to love each other and see each other as valuable just because you're human. It doesn't matter what your sex is, you know, you are valuable. And when we can treat each other that way, it begins to dismantle a lot of these problems that are happening.
The only way the pornography industry and sex work goes away is if demand dries up.
Right.
And demand dries up when people start to view things in a more healthy way. And so that, you know, but until that time, it's not really going to go away.
This is a big topic.
It is a big
It's
topic.
a lot. I know that there are a lot of different opinions on this, and that's okay if you disagree with us on some of the things that we've shared. I just want to wrap it up with this. I, again, acknowledge that a lot of times when purity culture and modesty culture is presented, people think that they are doing it from a place of protection. They want to protect the girls or whatever. That's fine, but let's do it in a way that's like actually safe and not saying that someone is responsible for someone else's behavior.
Right.
We always have to teach these messages with personal responsibility. And the choices that we make have to do with who we are, how confident we feel, how valuable we feel, how worthy we feel, how we view others, how we view ourselves, not, hey, there's somebody over here that has an issue. I have to change all of my life to accommodate that person. So I think having those conversations, how do we navigate the world safely? Because those people do exist and bad things do happen. But also in my own life, how do I become a healthy person? Whether I'm a boy, whether I'm a girl, whether I'm a man, woman, whatever, how do I become a healthy person?
Yeah.
And that's the conversation we should be having around sexuality and around modesty. We should be empowering people instead of sending messages that perpetuate fear, control, and victimhood, victim dynamics. That's what I have to say on that.
All right. Are you sure?
I could probably go on forever.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know. I hope it's helpful. I don't know if that's like, this may be an episode. Maybe I should put like a little thing at the beginning. Because I know depending on where you are in recovery, there's different things that we can hear at different times, right? So maybe this is a message for like 2 years in recovery or something. But anyway, I hope it was helpful. I know this is a confusing topic. It's really been on my mind this week, but it's something that I've sort of simmered in for years, thinking about purity culture and modesty culture and how the church communicates and stuff like that. And I just think we can do better.
Yeah.
I think we can do better. And I think we can help our kids. I think we can help our church communities. I think we can help our social communities. I think we can help our relationships by talking about things differently. And the biggest thing is like, I just have so much more faith in men's capabilities than what the messaging says.
Right.
I think that you are capable of being healthy. I think that you are capable of seeing women as human beings. I think you're capable of recovery. I think all of these things you just have to believe that it's possible.
Yeah, I think you're capable of being vulnerable. I think you're capable of saying, "Hey, I don't know why I felt this bad for as long as I felt," you know, and so there's so many things that, you know, we get wounded at a very young age and in community and things like that. That if we start to open up and can learn how to be safe, it can actually help in all aspects. So. Every day is a new opportunity to choose health and freedom. Make that choice today, and we'll see you next week.
Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.